Keeping calm in the situation is obviously important. So that child at the end of the day is disobeying you, but keeping calm about it in sort of explaining what you want them to do again might help.
I think giving the child choices, we were saying this earlier, so you say, right, you've got 3 choices, you either come over here as I've asked, or you leave the room, or you have to go to the head teacher's
Or the positive
or something.
one,
Yeah.
come and do it.
Or the consequences of not following. But giving them the choice, and then when they make the decision, hopefully to come over, you say, right, well done, you've made the right decision. But that puts the responsibility in their hands rather than you having to say, come here now, and having to get
I think
firm
also
with
in your
them.
choices, they also might say, I'm not doing any of that, I'm going to stay here. So you need to put in a 4th choice. If you sit at your seat and you refuse, you're going to stay in at playtime.
Yeah.
So that if they don't go out and they don't go see their teacher, and they don't move to the front, if they stay where they are, they know that they're going to be staying in at playtime as well.
I think in that situation, from personal experience of school, when you're being asked to move in front of the rest of your class, you get so embarrassed as well because the teacher's shouting at you, you're being asked to move, you've got to walk in front of everybody. I think just making the situation, just bringing it down, this child may have done something sort of really naughty, but just, giving them the choices and allowing the behaviour to come back to them and not just constantly shouting at them or making them feel silly in front of the rest of the class. I think that's quite important.
It's difficult because ultimately the reason they're doing it is because they want attention. They want you to focus on them. They want you to ignore the class and say, Miss, look at me, look at me. We had a boy that would never sit on the carpet, and the rest of the class knew that, so they would let him do what he wanted, and we never gave him attention. He was actually listening. So if you had kind of forced him onto the carpet, he would then fidget and fuss and moan and disrupt the whole carpet. But if you let him do what he wanted, if you still had the attention of the class and he was being safe and not dancing on the tables or anything, he was actually still listening. But because he was moving, he was able not to disrupt the rest of the class because they knew that this happened, so they would focus on you. So I think if you give them attention, it's almost rising to the bait, because ultimately they're doing this because they want your attention. So it's hard because you just want to kind of drag them to the carpet and go, sit there and listen like the rest, but obviously you can't.
I think as well, sometimes if he's not responding verbally, then if you have to do it on a repeated basis, and if he's forcing confrontation every time by gaining the attention, then don't use the verbal, just keep on teaching and talking to the rest of the children. Just go and tap him on the shoulder and point to what he needs to do. That might help. I mean, he might say no and he might still refuse, in which case you need to go through the procedures that all the children are familiar with. For example, if it is like moving him down on a behaviour chart, or moving the other children around him so that he's isolated and he hasn't got his audience, or whatever techniques that school or classroom uses.
It's hard because then I imagine in that situation, if I move the child down on the behaviour chart, although that's effective, I could imagine them then kicking off, and then I've got a bigger thing to deal with. But I think that's good, so that they've got it's a mutual thing, that the whole class is something, and he's being taken that on.
Usually what I find is if you move them down on the behaviour chart and they don't want to be moved down, they either start crying or they then say they feel sick, so they need to get a sick bowl, just because they don't understand, they can't deal with it in any other way. So then you need to give them options to improve their behaviour. Well, I'm moving you down on the behaviour chart, you're going from gold down to silver or whatever, and this is why. It's because I've asked you to come and do something, and unfortunately you can't do it for me, and everybody else in this classroom is being disturbed. So we're going to carry on with our lesson, and when you show me that you can do me what I'm asking of you, I'll move you back up on the behaviour chart. And I get them to physically go, if they will, and move their own stickers on the behaviour chart, so they can actually see themselves moving down. But then the reward for that is that they also get to see themselves moving up when they've when they've
done
had good behaviour as well.
I've used like the countdown method with Key Stage 1, so when you're like 5, 4, and then usually by 1 they just run to the spot. But with Key Stage 2, I think they can be a lot more persistent with their refusal to do something.
Yeah.
I think you just have to, I mean, if it's someone that does it quite often, and you know if sort of like moving their sticker on a behaviour chart or whatever is going to cause them to be even more disruptive, I think you should just ignore it. I think if they're doing it quite often, it might be for attention, as you said. So I think maybe taking it, like you said, take the rest of the class or whoever they're disturbing away from them, leave them, and then deal with the consequences later on when they've calmed down. So you've not got that, once they're worked up and already saying no, they're not going to do what you said, then moving them.
Where if it's persistently the same or consistently the same child that's constantly getting aggravated, and you can see they get worked up, and their only way to show it is by lashing out, by disrupting the class. There was a place where they could go, and it was their own space, their own kind of environment where they could go, calm down. They can do this at any point, and they just take themselves out of the equation, go and sit down, stay there, calm down, wait for the teacher to come over and have a discussion, or they just come back as soon as they're quiet. So you can have that own responsibility where if you feel you're going to become disruptive, you can take yourself out of the equation, calm down, do whatever you wanted to do over there, and then just join us whenever you want.
I had a little girl that used that, and it was like a workstation, but underneath it had a little blanket, and sometimes she'd just go into there, put her blanket over her head and have that, because she would get ever so worked up and she needed that time. And even if she went under there, she got herself so worked up she had a little cry, but then she was calmed down and able to
I think it might be more difficult if it's a child that you're not expecting that kind of behaviour from. I think it's quite easy to have strategies in place, especially if a child has come through the school. By the time they get, by the time they've been there a few years, they're familiar with the rules and the roles and responsibilities that they need to fulfil. But if it's behaviour that you're not expecting, it becomes more difficult. And I have actually said to a child before now, are you actually refusing to do what I'm asking you to do? Because quite often they just think they can keep saying no, and once they have to admit to refusing to follow the class rules, then they know what their sanctions are going to be, and you might not even have to remind them.